Hey guys! So, today we're going to talk a little bit about good practices as opposed to your own coding styles. So let's get into it. Now, this morning I woke up and I had a look at a few of the comments, and there was this person who had reached out and kind of illustrated a point that I think is fairly valid, and it's a really great point, where he basically stated that, oh, well, Frederick, I see that, you're talking about how to write certain software in a certain way. It was one of the code test videos as per usual. And he stated that, but maybe, maybe the person, like you're very controlling right now. You're saying that you should solve it in this way or in that way. And maybe this person would have been just fine solving this code test of yours if you just let them do it their own style. And so I replied, and I said, that's a very valid point. And I think it's something that we need to kind of address here. We need to talk a little bit about this, because I think that there's a misconception here, just a slight one at least. And the misconception is that when you're watching, me, or you're watching one of my little nice, whatever, videos about code, where I've actually written some code. Now, guys, I need to tell you something. Every single programmer has these slight differences in the way that they write software. Professional level software developers, even if they've worked for 10, 20 years, do not all of them don't write software the same way. Everybody has their own flair to things, let's call it that. That doesn't make the way that you write software bad or good or anything like that. And this is kind of where code reviews comes in, and the sort of review process that we software developers have when we work, because it's very important that we try to be consistent and we try to make sure that our way of writing software is still comprehensible to other people. But that does not make it the only solution available. There are, for lack of, this may not be a hard truth, but it's a statement that I think is fairly on the money. There's about as many solutions to a given problem as there are programmers. There you have it. Anywho. And what's interesting about this is that this person seemed to have a little bit of a, as I said, the perception was that I was, judging somebody else's coding practices based on these small little details. And that's not what good practices are about, guys. You see, one of the major differences between doing the sort of professional work, or the sort of work that you do at large-scale companies, or in companies where you work as a part of a team, or you work with several co-workers and you're all working, basically together, and working by yourself, is that when you work by yourself, there's nobody else checking out your code. You can write software that could in theory just be comprehensible to yourself. It doesn't have to be comprehensible to somebody else. But in a software company or an IT company, or when you work as a professional, you don't have that option. You're not allowed to do that. And because people who work in the industry have enough exposure to other programmers, and you work for long enough, you start to figure out, let's just call it a feel. You have a feel for how to solve certain problems. And what's interesting is that the people who work professionally as software developers, they very often have very adjacent solutions to the same problem. If you give a person who has worked for 10 years, if a group of people who've been working for, say, 10 years, the same problem, their solutions will very often be very similar. There might be small differences in the exact implementation, but the solution is usually very similar. That is not true for people who have either not, who are not, I'm not saying junior, because it's not a junior thing. It's more about understanding what is considered good practices within the industry. And we can just call it whatever you want, but the idea is, when you work as a software developer, is not for you to be creative with your software necessarily. It's about writing software that solves problems, and in such a way that it is not only comprehensible to everybody around you, but it's also something that should be agreed upon by your peers. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean basically that the only people, guys, and I'm gonna stick out my neck here, and I'm just gonna say it, because it's the only way I can relay this in a clear way, I think. The only people who get to write exactly the way that they want to write are freelancers and consultants who work as an island. Those are the only people who, trust me guys, there are plenty of my own personal preferences in writing software that I can't do at my job, because the other guys and girls who work there feel that, oh, well, no, Fredrik, we don't really like this, we would like to write this way instead. And this is usually where these coding practices or coding standards come from. You agree upon what to do and how to write certain things depending on, on a case-by-case basis. And every company is a little bit different. But then you have, of course, good practices for the industry, like where you're in the entire profession, there are good practices. There are plenty of these subtle little things. And what I'm saying is that if you spend enough time working as a professional, you will pick these things up and your way of thinking will start to align very closely to that of other professionals. And that's what a code test wants. One of the aspects that code test is there to kind of figure out. To just figure out how, where is your familiarity with these practices? So that's basically what I explained to this person. It's not about if you use like these small tiny little differences. Everybody has small tiny little differences in the way that they write software. The important part is that a good practice or a way of working is usually a way that software developers in general solve a problem. And if you try to challenge that with your own, your own solution, hopefully that's a better solution, but odds are that it's not going to be a better solution. It's just going to be your own preferences in writing software. And that's going to damage you because, once again, if you're alone, you can do whatever you want. But if you're not alone on a project, you need to write software that can, that is accessible to everybody there. And that's kind of the way it is, guys. So when I talk to somebody who either, and this is especially true for people who wants to get really fancy with Sass or CSS or like their code pens where they write these super sophisticated components with like a two screen widths, screen heights of Sass to create a certain effect. And I can tell you right now, guys, it's very rare that you see that sort of code out in the wild, because it's simply only maintainable most likely to the person who wrote it. And that's not great from a maintenance perspective. So what I want you to take away from this is that when we talk about good practices, you have to remember that like your own coding style, it's a negotiation. You cannot just write whatever software you want and then have everybody thank you for it. It's not about what you want, it's what's good for the group. And usually these good practices that we software developers have, and as I said, that makes us kind of align in the way that we solve problems, they have been around for many years. So instead of fighting that, I think that you should try to understand it, especially if you are a beginner, because odds are that you don't know better than these practices. Have a great day.